Our next presenter was going to be Tracy Haynes. However, Tracy's feeling under the weather today, so we have two really excellent last-minute substitutes who are going to make their way down. The first is Dave Sokoll, who graduated from Oberlin College in 2009. Dave has worked in education in local foods. He's worked at the New Agrarian Center, and that's led him to his current job as the food coordinator for the Oberlin Early Childhood Center. He has the best job. He cooks food for kids and makes them laugh. He's a wonderful person. And then Leo Evans is a volunteer with the Oberlin Underground Railroad Society. I'm forgetting exactly what it's called. He's also a great person, so he works closely with Tracy, and so they're going to sort of be the substitutes for this next talk, which I think is still called Hours and Food Sovereignty. I don't know what you're all going to talk about. Thank you.
We don't know either. This is not a step.
Yeah.
It's really tempting. Probably move it from the edge of the stage. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I am Dave Sokoll, as John said. This is Leo Evans the third. We are going to introduce ourselves and then talk about some of the things we're working on and how they relate and overlap. I'm a new board member of the Oberlin Underground Railroad Society, which Leo's been working for a number of years. So that's sort of where this synergy came from, was starting to do the same kind of work and then starting to see places where maybe our work could connect. Most directly and immediately is that Oberlin Underground Railroad Society runs a big garden in town, and I buy a lot of vegetables. So trying to make those connections, especially because Tracy and Leo work to, sorry, I'm taking your whole thing here, but it's just so exciting. Tracy and Leo work to get kids growing and moving those vegetables. So back to me, I'm Dave Sokoll. Everything John said, I've been at the daycare center for 1.5 years, which is the longest job that I've held in my life. Trader Joe's is a distant second at like 8 months. And I started there sort of on a whim, connected to City Fresh. I was driving for them, and Jennifer, the director, and I were in a meeting with some people from the public schools talking about how could we get more vegetables into the schools. And it, like many conversations about dealing with the federal bureaucracy around school food, it was frustrating, but it was also inspiring. We found some connections, and it ended up that Jennifer and I were able to collaborate on a little summer, can we start cooking our own food? There's a much longer story there, but I'll let Jennifer tell that sometime. But so we've been for 1.5 years now trying to incorporate local foods, incorporate healthy food, and incorporate community into our center however we can. From growing our own food, composting our kitchen scraps, making substantially more food from scratch and using local ingredients when we can. The food quality has definitely improved, and our food budget has actually decreased. We've spent more on labor. We cut about 1/3 of the budget, switching from processed food, often frozen, which was just being thrown in the oven and reheated and served, moving towards cooking from scratch. We've spent about 1/3 more on labor and 1/3 less on food. And we're spending more on food to begin with, so we've actually saved a little bit of money. We also have a lot of college students who come in and help out, which is wonderful, because we get to introduce them to a little more of the community. There's often sort of intergenerations working in the kitchen and talking and experiencing, and I think that's what's been, in a way, the most satisfying about this work to me, is all the different dynamics that are around it, with kids getting involved with, there's a dad who the first time I saw him, he's all tattoo covered, and this little guy, and he just looks angry. And then one day we started talking, he's like, oh yeah, I have, a 1/2 acre garden in my backyard, all kinds of food. And then I learned that his son was one of the ones who eats the most new foods in his classroom because he's being experienced to a variety of foods, and his dad has him eating cucumbers and tomatoes right out of the garden. So I think that's been a big part of the learning for me, is seeing where are the the access points for local food. When you get into, you know, why or why not are, you know, big markets successful, you know, the Oberlin Summer Market and Winter Market, or restaurants featuring local food, I think part of it is there needs to be the people who want it. You need to build that desire, and part of it is just this sort of late in life training, but part of it is cultivating growers and eaters and just people with palates from a young age. You know, I fail as often, well, thankfully I started to succeed more often than I fail in the meals that I serve to kids, but sometimes we served a veggie tart on Friday with some local flour in the crust and vegetables on top, and it was just like, it wasn't happening. It was so close to pizza, but most kids didn't want it. And as always, you know, maybe 20% of the kids ate it all. One of my friend's kids, actually, who's here, little Jacob, ate his whole thing. He said it had eggplant on it, and I love eggplant. And you know, that's not something you'd hear most kids say. And his parents have been serving him, you know, what is that, Super Baby Food. It's a great book for anybody starting off. So I'm trying to understand what we can do as a center to promote those practices for internally, and it's a struggle because I love the idea of local baby food, but it's been a struggle to do it consistently for our kids even. So figuring out how to make it work on our small scale and how to promote it into the community, both for our families and just in general, so that when we get a new kid in, it's like my job is exponentially easier if a child has come in already eating quality food, because then that's one more mind, one more mouth and belly I don't have to like convince to join the movement. So I think that's a good transition to my buddy Leo here.
Leo Evans, I'm a volunteer, work as a volunteer for the Oberlin Underground Railroad Society. And broadly conceived, our effort is to work on developing community primarily in the southeast quadrant of Oberlin, but also very much more generally as a whole, finding ways to create opportunities for people to come together. We've had a lot of success actually bringing college students into the southeast quadrant. It's not always the easiest task.
Myself included.
So our connection to food really stems from our approach of trying to create third spaces within the community, or a space kind of apart from the work the city might be doing and apart from the work the college is doing itself, and really find ways to have more of a grassroots approach. One of the key parts of that is the garden, the Oberlin Village Garden, which has been running continuously for the last 6 years. It's been a fairly robust effort. We've been able to produce food for a lot of the lower income neighborhood. We provide a lot of it to the older folks' homes right there in the southeast quadrant, and it's allowed us to find ways to help people learn both about the process of growing food, but also to make the decisions about the food that's being grown. I think this talk is supposed to nominally be about food sovereignty, and so our approach has been to create an effort by which people are actually directly involved in the process by which the food that they will come to eat is grown from the very beginning. Right now, obviously, it's a little too cold to be growing, but a lot of the planning obviously needs to be done. A lot of the preparations, and coming up in the next few weeks, we'll start working on seedlings, starting to prepare the earth, and throughout the entire growing season, we're able to involve a number of communities. I think mostly in the spring, we try to focus on the college students who might be leaving, or often do leave in the summer, so they can become involved for that earlier part of the season. Then we work through a lot of the summer with high school students and younger people to really continue that growing process and work on developing longer term relationships for people, for high school students who kind of need that summer employment, who need that focus, who want to be doing something to really working on something substantial, something meaningful. We've been able to do that continuously. for the last few years, providing them with a small stipend. Obviously, our efforts are fairly limited. Money is definitely scarce, but we've been able to generate income for high school students, selling our products at a market right on our on the grounds of the building that we actually own at a very reduced cost. Obviously, our effort will be, or is, to move as much of that food that we produce out into the community. We're not looking to make a dime, but kind of looking to break even. So we're able to sell, you know, a handful of tomatoes for $1 or $2, maybe a big old bunch of collard greens. Same thing, just $1 or $2, trying to get some money back, but not really focused on getting the full cost of that production.
We have a little script. I'm supposed to make that known or not. I'm just debating whether to stick to it or not. There's other questions I have in mind for young Leo, as Tracy calls him. But let's keep on it for a minute. I'm interested in that food network development that you're speaking on, because I think it relates to what I'm thinking of. You know, if we have young parents in town who have kids who are eating well, that again makes my job easier, which is the goal of this. And so I'm wondering how you see that working, and how you've seen that working, and how you hope that works. The connection between what the garden's doing, what people are doing out there, and this mission of this organization, which is called the Oberlin Underground Railroad Society. How do you see those? Where do you see the synergy in the middle there?
That's a good question.
I think you maybe asked this a couple of weeks ago. So.
Yeah. I think I've given one form of an answer. I don't know how much further I can move from there, but the main focusing goal for the organization has been an attempt to build community. And there's a number of different avenues. I think one of the ones we've been pursuing most consistently has been food. The organization itself is fairly young in terms of its capacity to engage in an array of activities. We only actually came into ownership of a property of a building last January. So it's been about a year and a quarter, maybe 15 months, that we've actually had a building that we've been able to work out of, really focusing our activities. We've had the garden, of course, for 6 years, I believe. So that's really allowed us to develop a process by which we're able to return year over year and further the work, learn from whatever mistakes we've made, really build off of the successes.
How do you see the building fitting in? The building is the Phyllis Wheatley Center. It's on the corner of Martin Luther King Park, which is sort of Groveland and Spring and
Pleasant and
I don't know.
Vine and Pleasant.
Vine and Pleasant.
I think the building itself will serve as a very consistent means to allow us to continue from growing food into processing or cooking. I think our main thing, our interest right now is developing a community kitchen to help people, or to allow people to come together and to cook and to develop that knowledge of how to work with food.
So what makes you different than that last guy?
I think our focus.
Profit versus not profit.
Yeah, our focus is definitely like educational, or trying to, very much a non-profit kind of mentality. I think it also flows well into something like a kitchen incubator. You have to grow the food, then you have to learn how to work with it, and then you go somewhere and you're actually able to make a product. Our stage is more at the first two parts, the growing of the food, and then the finding out what you can really do with it. There's obviously, it takes a while to learn how to cook. Being a chef is definitely a very arduous.
Yes.
Arduous is the best word, but
Arduous.
definitely it's definitely very much a skill.
Failure's an ugly thing to see when it's on the face of a child.
Definitely a very
happens quickly or incrementally, but I don't know if people want to hear the answer to that. Should we talk about food? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, let's do that instead.
I know Tracy, and one of the really unique things that she's done is engage the community, particularly the African American community, in reviving some of those gardening skills and I don't know what you would call it. It's kind of like a culture or a lore. Some of her volunteers have come in and shown how they did it in Kentucky in the 20s. I mean, it's some of the some of those to me that's kind of a very key way to bring people into processes to access those hidden skills in the community. So, I mean, there's cooking, there's growing, and that's I think, an amazing part of that experiment.
In many ways, I think we've moved away from those kinds of things. It's no longer really an important part of it, almost a matter of necessity, as it were, to really grow your own food and then to work with it. You can go to the supermarket and buy your TV dinner and put it in the oven. And that's a very simple way to cut out all the work that's involved. But I think it also, you're right, cuts out a lot of the culture, the finding ways to develop recipes that you actually enjoy. It's a very complicated process. It takes iteration over and over to develop those skills, and it allows you to move on from there.
Yeah, one of our board members is a former math teacher from Oberlin High School, and if he doesn't bring his grandma's, what are they, maple raisin, or molasses raisin cookies to a board meeting, it's like an insult to all of us. It's like, you better not show up without those cookies. And I think there's something important in there, that this is wisdom, communal wisdom, shared wisdom around food and its engagement in what we eat and how we make it. And that's what's been exciting to me at the daycare center, is getting to talk to parents about recipes, getting to share recipes with parents, talk about gardening practices. So I guess what I was hearing and you were just saying was this sort of advocacy for food community and what that can do for the community overall. It's not, I don't know if I feel the need to say, it's not quantifiable in some way, or it's not as easy to put a finger on as pounds of food distributed. Not that there's anything wrong with food, with what Nick's about to talk about. But just, I think, another side of that coin is just that incremental creeping. It used to be everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but I think most people were gardening and canning and cooking, and there was just sort of, that was part of life. And I hope I'm not sounding nostalgic, but in a sense things are simpler when there isn't these distribution chains running the way they are. So something that's really exciting to me, as a food person, we were talking about shagbark beans before. That's can get driven up from Athens in the back of somebody's truck, and I can have enough beans to feed healthy, pretty local, organic, cheap meals to kids at a daycare center once a week. At the same time, maybe I can buy, what were we talking about, carrots and sweet potatoes? Maybe I can buy some root vegetables from the community garden down the street, and kids can hop on the bike path and ride them over to the daycare center and drop them off. And I think I can't even say undervalued, because I feel like it's so easily forgotten, but what that does to a food system, having 3 more kids or 10 more kids who grew up riding vegetables down the street to the daycare center, as opposed to, I don't know, I'll just say McDonald's, because it's such an easy, just McDonald's.
The intersection between the local food movement and the traditional culture is what is really interesting. I mean, it's sort of opening up a whole new vein where these people who have practiced in their culture these same sustainable practices over generations are being highlighted and saying, wow, we've been doing this all along.
Right.
So,
Well, I think what I've seen at the daycare centers, that's just, a lot of school kids, especially daycare centers aren't cooking food. or aren't cooking food from scratch. So once you make that switch, it's kind of like the floodgates just open. I feel like the first year I was there was not some conscious plan of how we're going to slowly implement all these processes to make this a local food effort. It was just, let's start cooking and doing, let's cook as much as well as I can handle as someone who's never done this before. And it's just like, flip that switch a minute and think every school kitchen, as probably not even, somebody in the room might be able to correct me, but maybe 30 years ago. I mean, when was the last time there were fresh foods being cooked in the public schools kitchens with, chefs from the community? I mean, I've talked to people whose moms were the high school chefs and were making food themselves. So I just think, yeah, let's just go to questions.
I think one of the things, like with gardening, community kitchens, you're talking about a local infrastructure, local control and everything. And I think one of the things that gets missed, and Will Allen in his, the public library's got his book. He's the guy that runs Growing Power in Milwaukee, African-American guy, played basketball. I think it was basketball or baseball. Basketball, yeah. And he was raised a sharecropper's son, and then got into sports, and then had a career, and then had a career after sports, working for Kentucky Fried Chicken and some other, and some paper products, and then just kept going past this one spot in Milwaukee that had some old greenhouses, and then in '93 decided, I'm going to do this and build it, and he started off risking his retirement and putting stress on his marriage and everything, but it's just grown tremendously, so that now they've got people all throughout the community that are growing and having good food in what was basically a food desert and everything. But one of the things that he says is, with a lot of traditional communities where they had come from agriculture, when they did the Great Migration, or people that were in Europe and then came here, if they were peasants or sharecroppers, they didn't want to have anything to do with growing food, because that was the old ways, and they wanted to get away from that. And so I think I've been seeing this years ago. I was on with the Oberlin Agriculture Project, the Oberlin Sustainable Agriculture Project, which is now grown into the NAC, which is getting restructured again. But there's all this stuff that's going on around here, and I think we're really onto something here. I think, and I'm really excited about it. And but getting people to start growing and eating their own food, that's going to be the big thing. I see it happening, and I'm really excited about it. So I'd actually like to see, neighborhood competitions like the Great Oberlin Salsa Competition and everything, and the Great Oberlin Pesto Competition, and then have little mini festivals like that.
Do you see space for that in the next, in the future, through Oberlin Underground Railroad Society? Using contests to promote education.
Access to Southern Facts.
Okay, I do. As I want to put on my Oberlin Underground Railroad hat for a minute, because I do think that's part of the, making it fun, making it about food. I think I don't want to demonize the word local food, but I think we do get caught in sort of the established set of what this thing is. It's about, getting food from these places for people to have. But I think when you just think about food and food in a community, what does that look like? How can it be something? I mean, I think the winter market has been so much fun for me to be involved with, since it got rolling this year, because it's just been a place to go hang out and eat Ed's bread and put little slices of cheese on it, and to create that sort of, that third space. Third spaces, we got a little connection here. I mean, I don't want to get too broad too quick, but I do think there's a lot about community and isolation and the way that people live their lives nowadays that can be addressed through the local foods movement. And in a sense, I mean, what I see in my work at the daycare center is a lot of families, and I think families, if somebody has, if somebody knew it, it's like the person is a unit and the family is a unit, and families make up communities. There's a great saying about that chain, of that social chain that defines a community, and I think so much of it is about the family, and I think ours at OECC, I'm excited that we're talking and working because it's a community organization grounded in the community and a daycare center that has a long history in the community. And looking at a partnership between the two, I think is in some ways you could say is non-traditional or doesn't fit the bill. I think sort of my whole idea with OECC has been what is traditional and how can we do something different. Because the first step was just how do we start cooking food and how do we start people growing food, and I think those are powerful questions. Is there any other final questions?
Parent education. Can you say something about that?
Yeah.
I mean, how does OCC and ours involve? Oh,
Oberlin Early Childhood Center is
Early
OECC, and currently not enough. We have parent education around parenting, and we have handouts on recipes, and we have garden work days where people can come in and help out. But in terms of, I mean, maybe that's something we should look harder at as two organizations working together, is how can we structure some programming to educate community members around gardening, around preparing food, around taking things from, we also have a commercial kitchen, a quarter mile from the garden, not even. Maybe we could look at pulling stuff from the garden and bringing it to the kitchen and preparing it and sending people home with it. Yes.
This is where I would just like to point out that, and we all, a lot of us are already doing this, but just to put it out there that all of these various community gardens and cooking kitchens and things, we should all be working together.
Yeah.
And Oberlin Community Services does have, I believe it's monthly, that they have somebody come in and teach parents or people how to cook the food that comes in with the food that comes in to them, which some of the gardens do give fresh food and local food to Oberlin Community Services. They have their own garden there that they do during the summer. Legion Field Garden gives some food to Oberlin Community Services, and hopefully this year a lot more than in the past. So that's just my little plug, is that there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Let's all talk about it and be involved with it. So instead of reinventing the wheel, if Oberlin Community Services was already doing a class,
how do you model
then
it?
you guys say, go to Oberlin Community Services and let's help them make it a bigger program maybe.
Right.
So
And I think there's some value in each community having, we've talked about that, multiple kitchen projects in town isn't a bad thing, because there's a lot of people and there's a lot of communities, and if we're looking at what used to be where every kitchen was a teaching or learning kitchen, because every family was training their future generations to participate in the system, we don't need to look at it as just one, but I do think we need to model off of people who are, if OCS has figured out a way to do it well and has set up some of those relationships, I think some of my work at the daycare center was made much easier because Rick Panfill back there has done a lot of the groundwork for getting local source, and Brad and many others, getting local food sources coming into this community. So then it's sort of relationships that are already there can just be taken advantage of, as opposed to having to build every step of this process from the ground up.
Exactly.
I feel like we should end, because
Yeah.
he's about to throw something.
Thank you.
Yeah.